John stopped entire concert for Vietnam protester. What happened next left 50,000 in tears. October 13th, 1972. Madison Square Garden, New York City. The autumn air was thick with tension. Outside, police sirens wailed through the Manhattan streets. Inside America's most famous arena, 50,000 people packed together like sardines, their collective breath creating a fog of anticipation and anxiety. This wasn't just another concert. This was a powder keg waiting to explode. John Lennon was about to take the stage for what would become the most controversial, most devastating, most emotionally charged performance of his career. A performance that would destroy careers, expose government lies, and change the course of American history. But none of them knew what was coming. None of them knew that in exactly 47 minutes and 32 seconds, the former Beatle would stop his entire performance. Dead, cold, silent, for one man, one broken veteran, one secret so dark, so horrifying, that it would shatter everything they thought they knew about the Vietnam War. The crowd was restless, angry, divided. Outside Madison Square Garden, anti-war protesters clashed with police in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Tear gas drifted through the streets. Blood stained the concrete. Inside, the tension was suffocating, electric, dangerous. Nixon was president. The war was raging. American boys were dying in the jungles of Southeast Asia for reasons nobody could explain. The establishment wanted silence. The people demanded answers. And John Lennon had become the voice of a generation that refused to be quiet. This wasn't just a concert. This was a battleground. A moment when music and politics would collide in the most devastating way imaginable. A night when the truth would finally break free from the chains of government secrecy. John Lennon walked onto that stage carrying more than just his guitar. He carried the weight of a generation's anger, the pain of a nation divided against itself, the hope that maybe, just maybe, his voice could stop a war. His music could heal a broken country. His courage could inspire others to speak truth to power. He had no idea that tonight, someone else's voice would stop him cold. Someone whose story would change everything. Someone whose confession would expose the darkest secret of the Vietnam War. David Michael Mitchell sat in Section 204, Row M, Seat 17. 23 years old, 6 feet tall, 147 pounds of skin and bones, dark hair that had grown long since his discharge, hollow, sunken eyes that had seen things no human being should ever witness, hands that shook uncontrollably even when he wasn't thinking about Vietnam. In those trembling hands, he clutched a handmade sign, cardboard torn from a discarded box, black marker bleeding through the cheap material. 7 words that contained a lifetime of guilt. I killed for you. Now what? David wasn't supposed to be there. According to his military discharge papers, he was classified as psychologically unfit for civilian reintegration. According to his therapist at the VA hospital, he was a suicide risk. According to his mother, who hadn't spoken to him in 6 months, he was a disgrace to the family name. 3 months earlier, he'd returned from his second tour in Vietnam. 3 months of nightmares that jolted him awake screaming at 3 a.m. 3 months of silence so profound that he sometimes went entire days without speaking a single word. 3 months of carrying a secret so dark, so devastating, that it was eating him alive from the inside out. The crowd around him sang along to Power to the People. Their voices rose like thunder, shaking the steel rafters of Madison Square Garden. College students with long hair and peace signs, housewives from the suburbs who'd lost sons in the war, factory workers who'd seen their brothers come home in coffins, all of them united in their hatred of the war, their love for John Lennon, their desperate need to believe that peace was possible. But David couldn't sing, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. He'd bought the ticket with his last $20, money he was supposed to use for food, money he was supposed to use for rent, money he was supposed to use to survive another week in the rat-infested apartment he called home in the Bronx. He didn't come because he was a Beatles fan. He'd never owned a Beatles album in his life. He didn't come because he loved John Lennon's music. He came because he needed to tell someone the truth. And John Lennon was the only person in America brave enough to speak against the war. The only celebrity willing to risk everything to oppose the government. The only voice loud enough to be heard over the propaganda machine. The only person who might understand what David had done. What he'd been forced to do. What the government would never let him say. What would destroy him if he kept it inside much longer. David had tried to tell his story before. He'd gone to reporters. They wouldn't listen. He'd gone to congressmen. They threw him out of their offices. He'd gone to his family. They called him a liar, a traitor, a communist sympathizer. But tonight was different. Tonight, he had a plan. A desperate, probably suicidal plan. But a plan nonetheless. Tonight, John Lennon would hear his story, whether he wanted to or not. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. John Lennon was in his element. The crowd was electric. His voice was strong. The band was tight. Imagine filled Madison Square Garden like a prayer, like a promise, like a prophecy of the world that could be if enough people believed. Imagine all the people living life in peace. That's when he saw him. Section 204, Row M, Seat 17. The soldier with the sign. The man who wasn't singing, wasn't moving, wasn't even blinking. Just staring with those dead, haunted, absolutely terrifying eyes. The sign hit John like a physical blow to the stomach. I killed for you. Now what? John's voice cracked. The words to imagine died in his throat like a strangled bird. His fingers stopped moving on the guitar strings. The other musicians, confused and alarmed, gradually stopped playing. One by one, instrument by instrument, until there was nothing but silence. 50,000 people fell silent, sensing something was profoundly wrong. Hold on, John said into the microphone, his voice barely a whisper, but amplified through the arena's massive sound system. Just hold on a minute. He squinted into the harsh stage lights, trying to see the man more clearly. The sign. Those 7 devastating words. That face full of pain and rage and desperation. You, John said, pointing directly at David with a shaking finger. The young man in section 204 with the sign, "Can you stand up for me?" David's heart stopped beating. For a moment, he thought he might be having a heart attack. Every eye in Madison Square Garden turned toward him like searchlights. Security guards started moving through the crowd. The television cameras swiveled in his direction. Reporters grabbed their notebooks and began scribbling frantically. This was it, his moment, his chance, his last opportunity to tell the truth before they silenced him forever. "Don't be afraid," John called out, his voice carrying clearly through the arena. "What's your name, son?" David stood slowly, his legs shaking so violently he had to grip the seat in front of him for support. The sign trembled in his hands like a flag in a hurricane. "David," he managed to say, his voice lost in the vastness of the arena, but somehow, miraculously, picked up by the sensitive microphones. David what? What's your full name? David Mitchell. David Michael Mitchell. David Mitchell, I can see you have something to say. What does your sign say? Read it to everyone. Read it loud so everyone can hear. David looked around at the thousands of faces staring at him, at the cameras broadcasting live across America, at his parents, who might be watching, at his commanding officers, who definitely were watching, at the FBI agents who'd been following him for months. His voice broke as he spoke, but the words came out clear and strong. I killed for you. Now what? The arena went dead silent, 50,000 people holding their breath. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear hearts beating. You could hear the weight of those 7 words settling over the crowd like a shroud. John set down his guitar and walked to the edge of the stage. The distance between him and David suddenly felt like an ocean. 20 feet of space that contained all the pain of the Vietnam War, all the lies of the government, all the secrets that were destroying young men like David. David, John said, his voice gentle but urgent, I need you to come down here. I need to talk to you. I can't, David shouted back, tears now streaming down his face, cutting tracks through the dirt and sweat. They'll arrest me. They'll court-martial me. They'll kill me. No one's going to hurt you. Not here. Not tonight. You have my word. Security guards started moving toward David, but John waved them off with an urgent gesture. Let him come. Let him come to me. Everyone back off. Give him space. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as David made his way toward the stage. People reached out to touch his arm, to offer words of comfort, to show support. Strangers became allies. Veterans in the crowd began standing up, showing their solidarity. Women who'd lost sons began crying. By the time David reached the stage, he wasn't just one man carrying a terrible secret. He was the spokesman for every soldier who'd been silenced, every veteran who'd been ignored, every young man who'd been used as a tool of war and then discarded. John helped him up onto the stage. David was shaking uncontrollably. His sign had fallen somewhere in the crowd, but the words were burned into everyone's memory. David, John said softly, but his voice carried through the microphone to every corner of the arena. What happened over there? What did they make you do? David looked out at 50,000 faces, at the cameras broadcasting live to millions of Americans, at his one chance to tell the truth that had been eating him alive for 3 years. They told us we were fighting for freedom, David whispered, his voice cracking like breaking glass. They told us we were defending democracy. They told us the Vietnamese people would welcome us as liberators. He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. But we weren't fighting soldiers. We weren't fighting the Viet Cong. We were. His voice broke completely. John put his arm around the young man's shoulders, steadying him. Take your time, son. Take all the time you need. Tell us what really happened. My Lai, David whispered. I was at My Lai. The name hit the crowd like a thunderbolt. My Lai. The massacre that the government had tried to cover up. The atrocity that most Americans had never even heard of. The war crime that proved everything the anti-war movement had been saying. I was there, David continued, his voice getting stronger with each word. I saw what we did. I saw what Lieutenant Calley ordered. I saw what the Army told us was necessary. And God help me, I followed orders. The arena was frozen in horrified silence. David Mitchell, live on television, in front of 50,000 witnesses, was confessing to war crimes, admitting to participating in one of the most shameful, most brutal, most covered-up moments in American military history. March 16th, 1968, David said, his voice now carrying clearly through the arena, strong and steady despite the tears. Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment. We got orders to sweep a village called My Lai. Intelligence said it was a Viet Cong stronghold. They told us to expect heavy resistance, John's face went white. The cameras captured every emotion, every tear, every moment of devastating truth. But when we got there, David continued, it wasn't soldiers. It wasn't Viet Cong. It was just families. Children playing in the dirt. Old people sitting in doorways. Mothers holding babies. Farmers working in rice paddies. The crowd began to react. Some people were crying. Others were angry. A few shouted support for David. Others called him a traitor, a liar, a communist. The orders were clear, David said, his voice getting louder, more desperate. Kill everything that moves. Everything. Lieutenant Calley said it. Captain Medina confirmed it. Kill them all. Let God sort them out. And you followed those orders? John asked quietly. We all did. We were good soldiers. We followed orders like we'd been trained. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. The emotion was overwhelming, suffocating. How many? John asked, his own voice breaking. 504, David said immediately, without hesitation. I counted. I remember every face, every child, every mother holding her baby, every old man begging for mercy. I remember all of them. They haunt my dreams. They're with me every second of every day. He turned to face the crowd directly. For 3 years, David said, I've carried this secret. The government classified everything, threatened us, told us we'd be charged with treason if we ever talked. They said we'd be court-martialed, imprisoned, maybe even executed if we ever told anyone what really happened. John was crying now, openly, on stage, in front of 50,000 people and millions of television viewers. But I can't live with it anymore, David continued. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't look at children without seeing their faces. I can't hear a baby cry without remembering the sounds they made when we... He couldn't finish. He collapsed onto the stage, sobbing uncontrollably. What do you need, David? John asked, kneeling beside him. What do you need from me, from us, from America? I need forgiveness, David whispered. I need someone to tell me that I'm still human, that I can still be saved, that maybe somehow I can make this right. What happened next became legendary in the history of American music. John Lennon, without hesitation, without concern for his career or his safety, or the FBI investigation that was sure to follow, made a choice that would define the rest of his life. David, he said, helping the young veteran to his feet, you are forgiven. Not by me. I don't have the right to forgive you. But by every person in this arena who understands that war turns good men into tools of evil. You were a kid following orders in an impossible situation. John turned to face the crowd, his voice rising with passion and conviction. This man is a hero, not because of what he did in Vietnam, but because he had the courage to come here tonight and tell the truth, to speak against the machine that created this horror, to risk everything to expose the lies that are killing our children. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 50,000 people rose to their feet, not cheering, not applauding, simply standing in respect for a young man's courage to confess his darkest secret. The real criminals, John continued, are not the soldiers who followed orders. They're the politicians who gave those orders, the generals who planned those operations, the presidents who started this war based on lies. He pointed toward the government officials he knew were watching. They sent children to fight their war. They turned kids like David into killers. And then they abandoned them when they came home broken and traumatized. That's the real crime. That's the real sin. David was still crying, but something had changed in his face. For the first time in 3 years, he looked like he could breathe. David, John said, I want you to stay up here with me. I want to sing a song for you. For all the veterans who've been carrying secrets like this. For all the families who died in villages like My Lai. For everyone who's been destroyed by this war. John picked up an acoustic guitar and began playing Give Peace a Chance, but slower, gentler, like a hymn, like a prayer, like a benediction. David stood beside him, tears flowing freely, finally able to breathe for the first time in 3 years. But the most powerful moment came when David began to sing along. His voice, broken and raw and filled with pain, blended with John's, and gradually 50,000 people joined in. Not as a protest song, not as an anti-war anthem, but as a prayer, a plea, a promise to do better, a vow to never let something like My Lie happen again. All we are saying, they sang together, is give peace a chance. The television networks tried to cut the feed. The government tried to jam the signal. But it was too late. The truth was out. The secret was exposed. The cover-up was over. The concert ended 4 hours later. But David Mitchell's confession changed American history forever. Within 48 hours, 12 other My Lai veterans came forward. Then 20. Then 50. The government's carefully constructed cover-up crumbled like a house of cards. Congressional hearings began immediately. The truth about what really happened in Vietnam started to emerge from the shadows. John Lennon was investigated by the FBI, followed by government agents, threatened with deportation, labeled a dangerous radical, a communist sympathizer, a threat to national security. But he never backed down, never apologized for giving David Mitchell a voice, never regretted opening his stage to the truth. Music has the power to heal, John said in interviews afterward, as federal agents sat in the back of the room taking notes. But sometimes it also has the power to reveal. David didn't need my forgiveness. He needed the world to hear his truth. He needed America to face what we've done in Vietnam. David Mitchell testified before Congress for 6 months, helped expose the chain of command that ordered the massacre, named names, provided dates, offered evidence that the government had been covering up war crimes for years. His testimony led to the court-martial of 17 officers, the resignation of 2 generals, the criminal prosecution of Lieutenant William Calley, who was finally held accountable for his actions. But most importantly, David found peace. John Lennon saved my life that night, David said in interviews years later. Not with his music, not with his fame, with his courage. He showed me that the truth, no matter how dark, no matter how painful, is always better than silence. The footage of that concert was initially buried by the networks. The government tried to suppress it, classify it, make it disappear. But bootleg recordings spread across college campuses, anti-war rallies, and underground newspapers like wildfire. It became known as the night music stopped a war. Students played it in dormitories. Veterans shared it at support group meetings. Mothers who'd lost sons listened to it and finally understood what their children had died for. The recording became one of the most important documents of the Vietnam era. Not because of the music, but because of the truth it contained. The confession it preserved. The moment when one man's courage changed everything. John Lennon was murdered 8 years later, shot down by a fanatic outside his apartment building in New York. David Mitchell spoke at his memorial service, standing before thousands of mourners at Central Park. His final words were simple, but they echoed across the nation. John taught me that peace isn't just the absence of war. It's the presence of truth. And truth, no matter how painful, no matter how dangerous, will always set you free. He gave me back my humanity that night. He showed me that confession is the first step toward redemption. Today, in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, there's a small exhibit dedicated to that October night in 1972. David Mitchell's original sign is displayed next to John Lennon's guitar. The microphone he used to sing Give Peace a Chance sits in a place of honor. The placard reads, "When artists choose truth over safety, when veterans choose confession over silence, when audiences choose understanding over judgment. That's when music becomes more than entertainment. That's when it becomes revolution. That's when it changes the world. But perhaps the most haunting reminder of that night is a quote from John Lennon himself, spoken just minutes after David left the stage, captured by the arena's recording equipment. They say music can't stop a war. Tonight I learned something different. Music can't stop a war, but truth can. And sometimes music is just the bridge that lets truth cross over from darkness into light. The bridge where broken soldiers find their voice. The bridge where nations confront their sins. The bridge where peace begins with one honest word. And in the silence that followed, you could hear America listening, finally listening, to the truth they'd been hiding for so long.